Good morning. As you can see, I was going to say, it seemed kind of dark there for a second. I think we're back in business now. All right. Lock in, get comfy, everybody. Our first look this year at factoring. Ooh, I like to call this the Algebra 2 F word because most people just don't have a real positive outlook on it. But we're going to work on getting you some tools and some ideas here to make it a little less frustrating, okay, for you. So factoring, what is factoring? Well, let's kind of work our way from, I don't want to say backwards, but I'm going to anyway, in reverse from what we normally would do. We've done foiling before, okay? So let me grab my colors here. So foiling is when we multiply our first terms, again, remembering that there's an exponent on there, and when we multiply, we add the exponents. So 1 plus 1 would give me 2x squared. And then our outer, 2x times 4, negative 4 is negative 8x. Then our inner, 3x times x is 3x. And our last, 3 times negative 4 is negative 12. And at this point, we just look to see if there's any like terms that are available. And if there are, we combine them. Watching the signs, negative 8 plus 3 is negative 5. Signs do make a difference. And we're set. So what's factoring then? Factoring then means we're undistributing. We're undoing the distributive property. So now, instead of us being given the two sets of parentheses, the two quantities, and we multiply them out, now what we're going to do is we're going to take the trinomial, okay, the multiplied out version of this, and get it back into this form. And there's a couple different ways we can tackle this. So the first one is, sometimes you have to factor out a common monomial first, stressing common, okay? What are the terms, all terms that you see have in common? And again, that's the stressor here. All terms have in common, not just a couple. So here I look, I'm like, okay, well, they both have an x. I can take the x out. And then what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, so if this is x, or x to the first, how do I get back to x to the second? Well, how do you get from 1 to 2? You put another 1 in there. And again, if you want to put the 1 there, you can. If we don't see an exponent there, we assume it's there. So either way works. Okay, and then plus, here I already have the x. So I just add the 7. So either that, and we probably in the long term would prefer to see it this way, just because when we're writing this out, or especially if you're doing it in a computer program, they're probably not going to have those little exponents there. They're probably just going to have them as x plus 7. Because now if I distribute, x times x is x squared, x times 7 is 7x. You have successfully undone the distributive property. Now, is it always going to be that obvious? No. Sometimes we're going to get into something like number 2, and you're like, okay, they don't both have x, I can't take x out. Well, Hardy, 8 doesn't divide into 12. What do I do? Ooh. But do they have a common factor? Now, we've done this before. I'm going to show you some other options for this too going ahead here. So if I take 12 and I take 8, let's try and think of a number that will divide into both of them. But we always want the biggest one, and that can be the trick. So here, for instance, I can say, okay, can I do 8 divided by 2, 12 divided by 2? Yes. But before you use 2, is there a bigger one? Ooh. Well, let's see here. What about 4? Oops, you actually have to do both numbers, Hardy. Okay, 4 also works. So here's where I'm going to introduce an option that you're going to have. So I'm going to put the 4 down first. And then we're just going to look and we're going to go, okay, so 4 times what gets me to 8? 2, can't forget the x. 4 times 2x is 8x. 4 times what gets me to 12? 3. Now, if the whole figuring out factors and stuff is not your thing, I got something for you. And it's going to be attached at the bottom of this lesson. If If you're in class, you'll have them. If at home, you can bring it up, you can print it, you can just download it and pull it up when you're working on stuff to try and help you. Anyway, okay. There's going to be a help sheet. We call it the factoring help sheet. I'll refer more to this as we get more into the factoring. What I'm going to give you a look at is the back of it. Now, there's a multiplication table. You're like, how's that going to help me figure out the biggest thing goes into 8 and 12? What I would do is I would go through my list and I'd try to find places where I see 8 and 12 are in a row or column. So here, for instance, I see 8 and 12 in this column, but I keep looking and I see 8 and 12 here too, and then the number at the top of the column, or you can also work it over to the side in the row, that's where you're finding those multiples that'll go in. But again, you always want to look for the biggest one, and that can be a challenge because you see the first two and you're like, ooh, this one. And you're like, oh, wait, no, here's one further. So you can use the row or the column to get there. Just an option, especially if the numbers get a little bigger. You always can use the calculator as well, though. So we have choices. And sometimes, we're going to get multiple factors. So here I'm like 2 goes into 2 and 12, okay? But I also have my x's. Now, how do I figure out if I'm going to do x squared or just x when I pull it out? Okay? When we're looking for the common factor, 2 things to keep in mind. Okay, so one will be the biggest numerical factor, which means the biggest number that divides into both. You can just look at, you can just say like the biggest number if you wanted to. That would be okay. And then for exponents, we want the smallest one. You're like, okay, now why would you want the smallest one? Because if I took x squared and put it out here, what do you multiply x squared by to get x? It's smaller. That's not going to work. So we always take the bigger number, the bigger coefficient factor, and the smaller exponent. So here, I got the 2. I got 1x, but I need a second x. So I put x minus 2 times what gets me to 12, 6. And I already have the 1x, so I don't need any more. Always a good idea to take a minute at the end and just distribute and make sure you get it back. 2x times x is 2x squared. 2x times negative 6 is negative 12x. And we're good, okay? So that's one thing that can happen with factoring. So if I start to reference my sheet here, okay, factor out any common terms. Okay, that is step 1, every single time. Okay, next up. I start to look at this and I go, okay, let's see. No coefficient in front of the x squared. This is going to be a lot of guess, test, and revise at first. It is. I do want to reintroduce you to something you've probably seen before, though. I'm wondering if any of you have seen diamond problems before, where you were looking for 2 numbers that multiplied to get the number on the top and added to get the number in the bottom. So like if you had, for example, something like, let's see here. Now, some of you may have had these flipped the other way. It doesn't matter which way you do it as long as you remember which one it is you're doing. So let's say I'm multiplying to 8 and adding to get 6. You'd find 2 numbers. 4 times 2 is 8. 4 plus 2 is 6. And that would help us in a form like this. Like how so? Because when we're doing these, we're trying to find 2 numbers that multiply to the number on the end and to add to the number in the middle. Now, forget about the x for right now. What I want you to do, and I'm going to do a diamond on this first one, and then I'm probably going to stop doing the diamonds, even though you can keep doing them if you would like to. 2 numbers that multiply to 4 and add to 5. Now, I always like to think about it as the multiply numbers. I'm looking at this and going 4. I have 2 choices. 2 and 2, well, that doesn't add up to 5. Or 4 and 1, that does add up to 5. So 4 and 1. So how does that help me here? I'm going to make 2 sets of parentheses. Okay, it's going to end up looking like this one does. Put my x to start, because x times x is x squared. And then these 2 values are the 2 values I'm going to put here with the same signs. So It'd be positive 4 and positive 1 multiply to positive 4 and add to 5. 4 plus 1. And some of you at this point be like, well, wait a minute, Hardy, where'd the 5x go? It like disappeared. No, it didn't. It's just kind of hiding out here a little bit. So let me show you where it went. And no, you don't have to do this every time, but it might be not a bad idea to kind of watch here, maybe make a note of it. If I go back and do the FOILing like we did on the first problem, x times x is x squared. Outside, 1 times x is 1x. Inside, 4 times x is 4x. And last, 4 times 1 is 4. Check out the common terms in the middle. 1 plus 4 is 5x plus 4. Okay, I got my original problem back. So that is the factored form of this. Okay, but when we talk about guess and check, not all the numbers are going to be as tiny as 4. We're going to have to work at this a little bit. But that's basically what we're going to have on the docket. So I look at the next one, same thing. We're multiplying to get negative 40. We're adding to get negative 3. Now, there's actually a hint here within the first part of the problem as to what my signs are going to be. Okay, and here's that hint. Okay, I know it's going to be x and x. When you multiply to get a negative, how does that happen? Can I multiply 2 positives and get a negative? No. Can I multiply 2 negatives and get a negative? No. So I know one of these has to be positive and one of these has to be negative. Okay. Here's the other thing I know. This number in the middle is going to tell me the sign of the bigger number. And I'll explain why. So I start thinking about this. I'm like, okay, 40. What multiplies to 40? Oh my gosh, Hardy. 40. Okay, let's start thinking about this. 1 and 40. 5 and 8. 2 and 20. 4 and 10. Now, Hardy, how am I supposed to come up with all those? Multiplication has not been my thing forever, and now you're telling me I got to do all this multiplication. Okay, you have options. If that's a struggle, start dividing numbers in. Start with small ones and start dividing numbers into the calculator and start making a little mini list like this. It'll start helping you get a little bit sharper and quicker with what you're doing. Once you get a list, or pull out the handy dandy chart here again and find 40s and just follow them back to the edges. So 4 and 10, 8 and 5, that's an option. Okay, so once I get here, here's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the ones that are 3 apart. Okay, that negative in the middle tells me how far apart are the 2 numbers I'm choosing. Those 2 numbers are 2 apart. And this is why I like to think ahead on things, because now I don't have to go, well, where's the 5 go and where's the 8 go? I don't know. Whatever the sign in the middle term is, that's going to be the sign of your bigger number. So the 8 is going to get the negative, and the 5 is going to get the positive. Because if I FOILed this out, positive 5 and negative 8 make negative 3, my inner and my outer, and I quick test it. Okay, you always can FOIL it out, but that's an option for you. Okay, so now this last one throws one last twist in, and again, the way your problem's set up can give you a lot of hints if you allow it. So here, we're multiplying to get a positive. We're adding to get a negative. Now let's think about that for a minute. Multiply to get a positive. There's 2 options. Both numbers are positive or both numbers are negative. Which one is it? Man, that middle term tells us a lot. They're both going to be negative. Because negative times negative gets me positive, but it adds up to negative. And so now I got 12 here. So I'm like, okay, so 12. 1 and 12, no. 2 and 6, 3 and 4. So you're like, okay, so Hardy, you told me before that it's this many apart. Oh boy, first twist. it depends on the sign, okay? When the signs are different, you have one positive and one negative. This number tells me how far apart they are, okay? If the signs are the same, whether they're positive or negative, these two numbers are going to add to the number in the middle, okay? Different signs subtract to get the number in the middle. Same sign, add to get the number in the middle. So which two numbers add up to 8? 1 and 12 don't. 2 and 6 do. And since they're both negative, it doesn't matter if I put 6 and 2 or 2 and 6 here. And if I multiply it out, x times x is x squared. Negative 6x and negative 2x add up to negative 8. And negative 2 times negative 6 is 12. Okay? At the start, for some of you, this might take some time, especially if your multiplication's not real strong. Use the chart. Play with numbers in the calculator. You may have to make little lists like this. As you're doing them more, it will go faster. This is not one of those things you can quit on, because this is going to come up in a bunch of different sections in a bunch of different units. If you blow this off, you're going to have yourself in a huge hole. So you just got to kind of suck it up and keep firing on through with this. Okay? So now, there's one more type we're going to run into here today. Make sure I'm not getting ahead of myself. We're going to go the full gamut here. Okay. Might need to go get yourself some caffeine here in a minute if that's your thing. Okay. A little more difficult because of the lead coefficient. More options to consider, but we may have more guesses. And this is where Hardy throws a secret weapon in here momentarily. I'm going to grab myself a note card for the secret weapon. Okay. So now here's where life changes on us. If we're going to go traditional guess and check on this, and I'm going to do that on the first one here. Now I have a new twist to throw in. Because it's not just multiply to get 3 and add to get 7, because there's a number in front, this thing called a lead coefficient. So when that happens, I've got to figure out what multiplies to get that value. So in this case, 2 and 1 are my only options. So 2x and 1x are just x. So I get to here, and I go, okay, now what? So now this is still a multiply number. Okay, this is still what multiplies to get 3. And over here, again, I only have 2 options, 3 and 1. However, I need to make sure that when I put in my 3 and my 1, that I end up, when I FOIL it out, with the right number in the middle for 7. So I would encourage you to use a pencil if you're more visual on this, okay? Otherwise, you can kind of just wing it and go, okay, let's see here. 3 and 1, so if this was 3 and this was 1, and then I FOILed it, what would happen? Well, I'd have 2x, and I'd have 3x. So does 2 and 3 get me to 7? No. Okay. 2 times 3 is 6. Plus 1 is 7. And I notice all the signs are pluses, and so I can get there that way. Okay? That's the guess and check method. And as the numbers get bigger in front, that can get a little more complicated. So on number 8, I'm going to show you a different way of doing it. And then I'll show you one where we kind of do it both ways. You can kind of start making your own decision on this. But the method I'm going to show you on number 8 is called slide and divide. It's a different way of doing factoring when you have a lead coefficient. So I'll show you both. Well, actually, I'll show you both on 9. We'll stick to just slide and divide on 8. So here's how slide and divide works. You take whatever your lead coefficient is, the number in front. We slide it to the end of the problem, okay? So that 3, when I slide it, it multiplies. 3 times 10 is 30. And here's the reason people tend to like this way of doing it for some of these. Notice, there's no lead coefficient anymore. Now it's just a diamond problem like we were doing up here. And that's how we're going to continue this next piece. So I'm going to make my 2 sets of parentheses. And I'm going to look for my clues. don't jump in too far ahead. My multiply number is positive, which means my signs are the same. They're either both positive or they're both negative. My middle sign for my add is negative. So they're both negative. So I need two numbers that multiply to 30, but add to 17. Because remember, when they're the same sign, we're adding them to get that number. So again, whether you're in the calculator and you're just poking in numbers and you're dividing, you're like 30 divided by 2, 30 divided by 3. You try 4, you get a decimal. It'll never be a decimal. And so you get all these values jotted in, and then you start getting a bunch of decimals and repeat numbers. So you're like, okay, I'm done. Or you're using your chart. Which pair add up to 17? 2 and 15. Now, here's the kicker. We're not done. Don't circle this and put this as the answer. That's the one thing that people do on this a lot when we're doing factoring. I'm like, oh, you're going so good. Don't quit on me yet. So now, well, what do I have to do then? Okay, slide in, divide. Last part. You know that 3 that we moved out of the way before? We multiplied it down here. Now we're going to undo that. And how do you undo multiply? You divide. So once you do this, if it goes in nicely, 15 divided by 3 is 5. That's great. We'll get that done. But what if it doesn't? Okay, so I grab my calculator, and I'm like, okay, so 2 divided by 3, well, that's a decimal. That's not good anyway. Math, enter. Hardy, it's still 2/3. What do I do? If it's still a fraction at this point, okay, and I've reduced the fraction as far as I can, 2/3 was, we saw that on the calculator. What we're going to do is we're going to take that number in the denominator of our fraction, and we're going to swing it back here in front. You're like, what? Okay. Now, for some of you looking at that, you may think at the beginning, damn, that's a lot of work. But for some of these where you get into some larger guess and check, it's going to be your call. And if doing the in-your-head multiplication isn't your thing, because again, let me test it. 3x times x is 3x squared. 3x times negative 5 is negative 15x. Negative 2x. Positive 10. And we end up back at the beginning, okay? It's worth your while to know how to do this. It's going to take some work. It's going to take some practice, okay? But we're going to get there. So I'm actually going to break this lesson into 2 separate pieces because I know it can get chunky, and I want some of you to be able to watch, maybe go and practice a little bit, and then come back once you're ready to start doing that. So I'm going to do 9 and 10 here. 9, I'm going to do both ways, okay? I'm going to do the guess and check first, and I'm going to do the slide and divide second. Now, if you're a fan of slide and divide, maybe you just watch this first one to kind of see, because I'm going to have a sticky note that I'm doing the second part on here so we can hopefully have enough room here. So, okay, if I'm going to do guess and check on this one, 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 1 is 8. I have options this time. 3 times 3 is 9. 9 times 1 is 9. And you kind of see where I'm heading with this. I need to find myself a pair, one pair from here, one pair from here, that when I do the middle part of FOIL, the O and the I get 6, or I find a way that I can get to 6. Okay? So let's say, for instance, I'm going to stick in, no, I'm just going to do this. If I do this, I'm looking at this and I'm going, okay, 8 times 9 is 72. Oh, yeah, that's way too big. And 1 times 1, no, that's not going to work. What if I do 8 times 1 and 1 times 9? Well, that's 8 and 9. Can I get to 6 that way? No. Okay. So that pairing isn't going to work. So then maybe I come down here and I go, okay, let's try the first ones in each. So 12 and 6. 4 times 3 is 12. 2 times 3 is 6. Ooh, 12 and 6. 12 and 6, if I subtract them, I can get to 6. Okay, let's try this. A lot of mental math if we're going to go this route. Okay. So 12x and 6x. Okay. So now let's see. My multiply number is -9, which means it's one of each sign. Okay. So I know one's positive and one's negative. Does it matter where I put them? Yes. Because my add number is -6. So the bigger one of my inners has to be negative. So let's say I put plus minus. Okay, I'm just going to do it really light here. Plus minus. So that would be 4x times 3 is 12x, and -6x. Is 12 minus 6 -6? Nope. Is -12 plus 6 -6? Yes. And I'm good. Okay? That would be our guess and check method of going here. I'm going to try and get slide and divide on here. So what if I do that same problem doing slide and divide? And again, I won't tell you one way is right or wrong versus the other. Some people may, I'm not going to. I just want you to get the right answer. So if we're going slide and divide, we slide the 8 down. Okay. Now the challenge with slide and divide at times is you are going to have some large numbers to deal with, but you have a calculator, you have a chart, have your brain as well, that you can work with on these. So let's see here. What do I know? I know my multiply number is negative, so it's one of each sign. I know my add number is negative, so the bigger number is going to be negative. Different signs. Are we going to be looking for adding to 6 or subtracting to 6? Subtracting to get 6. Different signs, we're subtracting to get that number in the middle. So I start my search. So I'm going to be your human calculator for this one. So if you happen to know it off the top of your head, great. Otherwise, if you're diving into the calculator, you're like, all right, oops, I missed one. So I was dividing lots of numbers in. Again, just taking the calculator, 72, divide by 2, divide by 3, divide by 4, and just kind of make yourself a list. But again, which two are 6 apart, okay, that I can subtract to get 6? Nope, too big, too big, too big, bingo. Bigger sign. Bigger number gets this sign. So the 12 gets the bigger. Now, before you pat yourself on the back and say, woo, and circle it, wait, we're not done. Because last I checked, x times x doesn't get me 8x squared. So we have that last piece to do, the divide part. Now, oh boy, we got to be careful here. You're like, Hardy, I know 6 doesn't go into 8 and 12 doesn't go into 8. Just slide the 8s back to the front. You're like, what do you mean? My gosh, dude, can you keep the same thing going for a minute here? Remember when I was talking before, okay, it is critical that if it doesn't go in nice, that your fraction is in its simplest form. Okay? Just because you get a decimal doesn't mean it's already in its simplest form. And I'll show you in a minute here once we get to the answer why I had to do this. Otherwise, it's going to be wrong. So both of these, they're fully reduced and they're still fractions. So on both of them, we'll go ahead and swing those back to the front, and I get my same answer. So what would have happened if I didn't do this step in the middle? What would have happened, and why is it wrong, if I would have left it, okay, when it was 6/8 and 12/8, and I'd have just taken my 8 and swung it back to the front? The answer should be fairly obvious here fairly quickly. Okay, there's the answer I'd have gotten. If you go back to check, because this should multiply out to the original problem. 8 times 8 equal 8? No. Reduce the fractions, please, and thank you. Okay? Several different things rolling here with this. And again, That's okay. There's some things we're going to have to figure this out as we're doing these. But again, with time and practice, I have a feeling I'll be doing a few of these in Google Meets as we're going along, and that's fine too. But you've got to keep practicing, because that's the one complaint I get from people. They're like, I don't like this, I'm not going to do this. Well, you need to do it because it shows up everywhere. So we got to find a way and roll with it. Okay. So number 10, and then like I said, we're going to cut for now. There's a second video in this section though. So if you get going on the practice, you're like, we haven't done that. You haven't quite watched far enough yet. How can we write this so it follows the same pattern? If you ever want to keep doing a pattern where you're working on like the diamond method, okay, like we did in 4 through 6, you always have the option, if it's just 2 terms, of putting a 0 term in the middle. Okay? Because if I did this, and this is going to get introduced in the next section fairly early in the next video that you see, I could still use my diamond to do this. Okay, my multiply number is a negative 36, so I know it's one of each sign. Now, my add number is 0, so what does that mean? It means when I take these 2 numbers and I subtract them from each other, I'm going to get 0. So let's think about that for a minute. I probably didn't need to do all these on this one, because I need the 2 that are going to wipe each other out and go to 0. The only pair that can do that is the same number. X plus 6, x minus 6. Positive 6 and negative 6 cancel, get me 0x. X squared, 6 times negative 6 is negative 36. Okay? So for the moment, again, this lesson isn't officially over. We're right in the middle here right now, but I want to, again, break it into pieces, go get a snack, go get something to drink. Maybe try a few of the practice problems, okay, that are ahead on the introduction to factoring practice. You would probably be good working on the front of this right now, okay? Factor out a common term and some diamond problems. And if you're really feeling brave, you flip over and you keep going on the back some with some slide and divide or some guess and check. But we're going to get you some more examples of some twists and turns that can come here. So stay tuned. We'll be back shortly.